So I recently got really interested in virtual production. If you're not familiar with the term, it deals with anything where you're using real-time graphics, such as a video game engine like the Unreal Engine, to create graphics for filmmaking or to do something related with filmmaking. It's not a real great definition, but you'll probably understand what I mean if you look at some examples or just search the term. The best example of this right now is probably The Mandalorian. If you've seen any behind the scenes, you'll see these gigantic LED walls that they use both as sort of the background sets and to help with the lighting of the actors. And people have been figuring out techniques on how to bring the cost of this down to do these sorts of things for much smaller budgets than they have on a gigantic television series by Disney. But you still need to put in a fair amount of money to be able to do this well at the moment. Not only do you need a camera and either LED wall or green screen and some way of getting that camera signal into a computer and a strong enough computer to be able to calculate the graphics in real time and do the compositing in real time, you also need virtual reality equipment that can be not super expensive, but it does add to the budgets. If you look at the Vive Pro setup, you're looking at probably, I'm talking Canadian dollars, but I think about $1,200 for the equipment that I would need to be able to do this. And I was looking for a way to do it for cheaper. This is by no means something you could just follow this lesson here today and just go in and start making movies tomorrow. It's a work in progress. My hope with this is that if I put this information out into the world, other people that have this equipment lying around their houses or can get one or two of these things can maybe start experimenting as well, and we can figure out a way to make this work to really let anybody with an iPhone, a camera, and an input make a movie using virtual production techniques. Let's talk about the equipment that I'm using for this test. Rather than using a Vive Pro with its base stations and sensors and all that, we're going to be doing all our tracking using a iPhone 8. So Unreal allows for you to use your iPhone as a sensor to move a 3D camera around. It's mostly been used for adding sort of a handheld camera feel to cutscenes in video games. So my idea was that if I can have the iPhone mounted on a camera, so using just any kind of camera mount, I could then use the position and rotation data from the iPhone as a means for telling Unreal, hey, this is where the live action camera is. That way we can marry a computer-generated background with live action footage. The other thing we need to do this in sort of a real-time way is some way of getting your camera signal into the computer, and in my case I'm using the Camlink, Elgato Camlink HD. There's a 4K version of this. You could use a lot of the Blackmagic tools. Aja makes a bunch of things as well. Those are usually more expensive than this, which runs about $200 Canadian. So yeah, this is sort of a low budget way of doing things. Just a note, I'm using Unreal 4.2, 4.3 in this, not the more recent 4.25. That's simply because I haven't tested it in 4.25, which I only downloaded yesterday. It should work exactly the same way. I don't think anything's really that different between the two versions in terms of what I'm using here. I don't know necessarily that the iPhone is the only way to do this sort of technique. There is a virtual camera plugin or sort of a virtual plugin by a company called By Owl Studio for the Android to connect to Unreal. It's about $40 Canadian, I don't know, $30 US probably. I don't have it. My Android phone is pretty old now, so I don't know that it would work even if I did. But that might be something to explore if you are a brave Android user. So I wanted to show a very brief look at how the hardware is set up here. And so we've just got the iPhone sitting in a mount on top of the GH5 on a tripod that I can move around. And there's an HDMI cable going out of the GH5 into the Elgato Camlink, which goes into a USB port. So we're going to be doing three things here. We're going to first be bringing in the live video signal from our camera via the capture card. Second thing we're going to do is set up the virtual camera, which uses the iPhone for the tracking data. And the third thing we're going to do is use Composure, the Unreal Engine compositing engine, to combine those two layers and add the two effects together. So we're going to start off with creating a new project, and it could really be any of these. I'm going to go with games and third person, just to give me a place that I'm familiar with, and leave that all as it says. And I'm just going to change this to phone track will be the name of my project, and create that project. So here we are in a brand new project, and to start off I'm going to head over to the edit plugins, and we're going to look for a couple of things. So first off, we're going to go to compositing and make sure that Composure is enabled. And next we're going to go look for virtual camera. And here we go, virtual camera. Now that is to control the actual virtual camera, but to get it to work with the iPhone we need to install another two plugins. The first being the Apple AR kit. So let's enable that. And finally, we're going to look for something called a remote session, which is what will let us interface with that iPhone. Here we go. So we're going to restart now.
A few moments later.
Our first order of business is to get our live action camera into Unreal Engine. So to start that off, I'm going to head to Content Browser, and I'm going to right click and make a new folder called Movies. I believe you should name this Movies. That's what I read somewhere. Not 100% sure why, but hey, it's not going to hurt to just name it Movies. I'm going to head in here, and what we're going to do is in the Content Browser say Add New, and go to Media Player. Now this is going to create a media player that's going to allow us to bring in our camera feed, or it could be used to bring in a video clip of somebody against the green screen. But as we're trying to do this live, we're going to be bringing in a live camera, and it's asking us if we want to create a video output media texture asset, and we're going to say yes. So now we have a new media player. We're going to call this Input, and let's double click this now. So it's created a media texture here, and that media texture is going to be our actual video clip. We're going to head up to this little folder here, click that, and look for, in this case, I'm bringing in the Elgato Cam Link. And there's a little deckard that I have set up. If I move the camera, we see that that's happening in real time. So I'm going to save this now just to get this guy in the scene so we could just see how he's doing every once in a while and make sure that our camera feed is going. I'm going to minimize this for a second, and I'm just going to create a plane. Just a nice little plane. Bring it up. And we're actually going to create a material from our input video by right-clicking on it. And we're going to call that video material. Oops. And I'm just going to apply that to my plane here. So if we were to... Oops. If we were to rotate that now, we'd see a little deckard. And it's obviously... Just going to resize that a little bit. So we don't really need this in the scene. It's really just to have a look at whether our connection is going. And right now, if I move the camera, you'll see the live video is changing on the plane. There we go. So we've got one problem half solved, because if I were to open up this input window again, and we can still see that he's live, if I were to close this down, even though I've saved it, the feed into Unreal seems to go dead. So even if we move the camera around, you can see on the input video, the thumbnail here, nothing's happening. So what we want to do is make sure that that connection is established in the at the blueprint level. I don't understand why, but this is the way it seems to work. So I'm going to bring that cam link back, and we're going to look here and see this little URL that starts with vidcap. And I'm going to control copy that, and let's minimize it again. So the next thing we're going to do is head into the blueprints and go into the level blueprint. We're going to have a event begin play to start things off, and that's going to tell everything to when we press play, these things will happen. We're going to create a variable. I'm going to call this media player. And I'm just going to hop over to the variable type, and we're looking for a actual media player variable type. So we're going to find that down the list. We have to change the default value, but because there's nothing here, we're going to head over to the compile button and hit that. And now from the drop down, we have our input media player, which is the one we created over here. So let's select that. And I'm going to now control drag this guy into the blueprint. And now what we need to do is drag this out and place a new node. And what we're looking for here is open URL. So let's click that. And the URL we're going to use is the string we copied over from the input media player in our live video, which is vidcap, USB, whatever. So there we go. Now we're just going to connect the event begin play over here. And I probably compile and save this. And let's shut this down. So now nothing's playing here, despite Deckard still being live on the camera. But if we were to press play, and now this is what I'm doing live. I'm moving the camera around, and the video of Deckard is moving around. So that's our step one. We have our video into the software. Step 2 is going to involve our iPhone and setting up the virtual camera. Our next step will be to go into our world settings, and we're going to switch our game mode over to virtual camera mode. Now that that's done, we have to connect our actual iPhone to be used as an interface. So what we're going to do is go to we're going to go to our command line, CMD, bring open the command prompt, and what we need is our IP address. So ipconfig, we're going to open up uremote and type that IP address in here. I've already done that, so I'm going to hit OK and connect. And now when I press play, I have control through the iPhone of the camera. So we now have a virtual camera working, and we have a live video feed. How do we bring these two together? Well, we're going to need Composure. So let's stop this playing. Put the iPhone down. Our next step is to go to Window, Composure, Compositing, and open that up. And I've already got it tucked down here. So let's have a look at creating a new composition. If you're familiar with After Effects, it's exactly like creating a new comp there. So we're going to name this guy, going to say yes to this empty comp shot. And I'm going to call this Composite. And it's popped up right here, and we can see that it's empty. So what we want to do is add 2 layers to it. We're going to be adding the virtual camera layer over here, and we're going to be adding the real-life camera, and then pulling the key on the real-life camera and combining everything together. So I'm going to right-click on the comp and say Add Layer Element. So we have a couple of options here. Media Plate, which will be our video layer, a CG layer, which will be our virtual camera, and CG Matte. So what we're going to do first is let's bring the CG layer in. Oops. And if we hit this drop down, we see there is something called CG Element. So at the moment we're missing a camera, as it tells us right here. So we're going to head over to the cinematics area of the modes and bring out a cinema camera actor. Drop that into the scene. Let's get a nice wide-ish view here of everything that's happening. And let's deselect that camera now and go back to our composite. And it's automatically put that camera in. But we also want to go into our composite and under the input, let's say the target camera, and pick that Cine Camera Actor. So we have our CG plate, and now we're going to go back onto the comp and add a new layer element, which will be our media plate. And let's just keep that name Media Plate 1. And what we're going to do is head over to the inputs and pick our media source, which will be our input video. So there we go. It's actually not live at the moment. If we wanted it to be live, we would have to head over here into the input and reconnect that cam link. I don't know why it does this, but that's how it works. As long as it's minimized, we can see the live feed. So we have our green screen, and what we need to do now is key this green. There are obviously going to be better versions of this as a tutorial for how to actually work with the keying. I'm going to do the basic bare minimum key here just to get us moving. And we're going to head into the transform compositing passes. Under the multi-pass chroma keyer, we're going to go to key colors and hit add elements. And now this gives us a little color selection tool. We're going to hit this and just pull a key. There we go. Got a nice cleanish key. Deckard is still live here. Obviously, there are lots of options you can choose to tweak this better, and there's despills and erodes. We don't really need to deal with that for what we're doing today, so I'm going to move on. And if we actually head back in Composure and look at the composite, it's still empty, and that's because we need to create a material to blend these two elements together. So we're going to go under Composure, we're going to go to the transform passes, and we're going to say a custom material pass. If we drop that down, we're going to see make a new material here, or we can head to our content browser. And I'm just going to hop up to our top layer and create a new material. Let's call this Comp Matte. And I'll double click that to open up our material maker. So the first thing we're going to do here is look at our actual material, and we need to switch this over from surface to a post-process material. And what that's done is taken away some of the options here, but we have an emissive color. What we also want to have is the opacity. So let's just type opa. Alpha. Output alpha. When we click output alpha, the opacity lights up here. So from here, what we want to do is bring our two elements together. And we're going to do that using an over. So let's add each element as a material. We're going to look for something called param2D. Texture sample parameter 2D. And I'll call this one live. And we'll get another one. And we'll call this one CG element. And we're going to pipe the RGBA. Oh, no, we need something to actually blend them together. So what we're going to do is right-click, and we're going to look for something called an over. And what an over does is it just combines the two. So on top, we want our live action plate into slot A, and we want our CG into slot B. And our RGBA is now going to go into emissive color. Let's just save that and close this out. So we've got this comp mat here. We're just going to drag that onto the material of our comp layer. And now, hey, instead of empty, we get a nice green blob. Well, we've got to now add the two elements into our green blob. So for the live material, we're going to go and pick our media plate, which is dead at the moment, again, because this disconnects so much. Where's our... So now if we make that live again, we can see, hey, we've got Deckard standing in front of this green blob. So let's go add the CG element. And here we're going to choose the CG element 1. And now, if I move the camera, well, that's all well and good. Deckard is moving, but the background isn't moving with him. So we have to now connect the virtual camera. And we'll do that by starting up our iPhone. So while we have Deckard here in the window and we have a background, we can't move it unless we play our level here, and unless we play our level. And when we do hit play, ta-da, we're losing our comp. So what we need to do is output the composite, and we're going to do that by going down to the output settings and adding an output. We're going to say player viewport. So now what this is doing is taking our composite and outputting it here in the player viewport. So now if we hit play, we have our view from our camera, or was from our camera, but we do have a background moving and we have Deckard moving as well. So we're going to grab our Cine camera and just rotate it. See if that fixes our problem. Let's put it 90 degrees the other direction. And let's hit play again. And there we go. We have a little bit of a better view. In the sequencer, I'm going to actually create a new master sequence. I'm going to say, let's give it a 15-second duration. head over to the Composite and bring that over into my sequencer and just drop it in here. And now if I were to render out from here, I'm just going to use my default settings. I'll change it to 1080. Say yes to save selected. You're going to get a tiny bit of a window here. You should get a better view on the camera. You can get a more finalized render. Although, one of the many mysteries to me still is why do those green things appear? "15 seconds of Deckard in his little virtual world." So there you go. There's obviously a couple of issues still, mainly that they're not totally in sync. I'm not sure if it's a frame rate issue, if it's an issue with just my computer being 5 years old and having a couple of 970 GTX cards in a world of 2080s. But if somebody out there has some ideas, either post it in the comments here or maybe over at the Unreal Virtual Production group on Facebook. I want to give a shout out to two YouTubers whose information was absolutely essential for me to be able to do this. Andy Blondin, who's got a great tutorial on Composure. FattyBull is someone else. I've linked to both of them below. I also linked to Matt Workman, who I believe started the Facebook group and whose YouTube channel has been invaluable for learning just about this field in general. I knew it existed before I found his channel, but seeing his channel really was eye-opener on how you can actually do this stuff. Another little note is I turned off the image stabilization on the GH5 and on the lens, and I turned down the motion smoothing on the iPhone's Unreal Remote, as low as I could, because I think that's necessary to make sure that we get the smoothest, closest motion as possible. But who knows? Really, I'm just making this up as I go. That's it. Okay. I was going to say something else, but I don't remember.